Hello and welcome to this training on workforce sustainability. And this is part of the Trauma-Informed Care series for the CARE Act implementation. This training is part of a series on trauma-informed care and what it looks like to use empathy and cultural humility when approaching participants in care. But this also applies to practitioners and providers who are involved in this process. This is a population with a lot of complex needs, complex traumas, and like our speakers today will talk about, that can also impact the people who are providing the care through secondary or vicarious trauma. So we wanted to spend some time today to talk about strategies for sustainability that the individuals can take and some organizational considerations as well. So we are really pleased to be joined by two wonderful thought leaders in this space that have a lot of experience dealing with these concepts. So we have Dr. Karen Louise Hill with Health Management Associates, and then Rachelle Chambers, who is one of our partners, co-executive director and COO of Painted Brain in California. And they have a lot of great perspective on what this looks like in practice for practitioners when working with complex populations and how to have a sustainable work environment yourself. Let's take a look at what we'll be covering today. We have three general sections. The first one is talking about those workforce wellness and risk factors and how you can anticipate different situations. And the second section on resiliency, self-compassion, and self-care, really some strategies for what you can do when you're finding yourself and staying healthy emotionally and physically. And then the last section is our shortest of the sections, but we wanted to have this separate conversation about how self-care and workforce resilience support the care respondent and what we hope to see for our practitioners. So some learning objectives we have is to have an increased ability to recognize our own work-related stress and triggers, define an ARMS tool, which is assess, recover, mitigate, and strengthen, identify some strategies for cultivating self-compassion and care, and describing at least one goal that we have for both respondents, workforce, and organization as we look to implement this in practice. So with that preamble, I'd like to turn the time over to my colleagues and hear from them on some strategies we can take. Karen?
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's such an honor to be with you again today and to present with my colleague, Rachelle Chambers. Workforce wellness and risk factors. The nature of work is changing at a whirlwind pace. And the COVID pandemic really has shined a light on the mental distress and the difficulties that not only our community having, but people who are providing care are having. What we know, the evidence is rapidly accumulating that suggests that workplace stress plays an important role in several types of chronic health issues: cardiovascular disease, musculoskeletal, psychological disorders, and organizational health and sustainability. So we're going to look at workforce wellness and risk factors through the lens of the organization and leadership, as well as the individual. And all of that is going to be underpinned by how trauma-informed health care can help facilitate that. Let's talk about the problem of behavioral health work-related stress. We have on this slide lots of statistics for you, but they're actually quite striking. That 1 in 10 behavioral health professionals that have said that they've experienced burnout. About another 60% saying that they're suffering from moderate or severe levels of burnout, so much so that people are even thinking about leaving the profession. 50% or nearly 50% have said that the impacts of workforce shortages have actually caused them to think, I just can't do this anymore. We've got the increases in caseloads. There's a huge, enormous increase as a result of the pandemic. People had horrific experiences during that period of time and are seeking care. And then we have finally 83% of our behavioral healthcare workers are worrying about these shortages and how it's going to negatively impact society in the long run. So, we know that this is really expensive. You see this number on here, it's kind of eye-boggling. $150 billion is what we think is lost either due to burnout, and another concept or workforce illness, early disability, another concept called presenteeism. And you might be saying, well, what exactly is that? Presenteeism is really when someone comes to work, but they're not completely there 100%, either mentally, physically, emotionally, or both, that the stress of the job and of the everyday work could be family burden, what's really happening in community is causing them not to give their all. Let's talk about the various types of trauma, because there's a lot of them, and we're going to really hone in on two specific types here that really play an integral role in burnout, presenteeism, and so forth. So compassion fatigue and secondary trauma is what we're going to talk about. Compassion fatigue is, the work that we do and the work that you do, particularly in the behavioral health space and with our care respondents in this work, they have multiple complex needs. So complex compassion fatigue happens when providers, due to the chronicity and the nature of the problems, just get to a point where they just have a reduced capacity for empathy. And it can result in either burnout and presenteeism. You hear the stories over and over and over. A client may get stabilized and then something happens. You get them housed and something happens. And so it's really, really difficult. Secondary trauma, on the other hand, is just from the exposure of the work. We see the lives sometimes that our clients live. You see the situations and things that happen in the communities that you're working in all the time. And secondary trauma has the same kind of emotional effects that we often, if gone unaddressed, if we don't address our compassion fatigue, if we don't address these traumas and these experiences, really can have a very, very detrimental effect on us. So I'm going to turn this over to my colleague, Rachel, who can talk to us a little bit more about our exemplar. We love to do exemplars and give you a case study.
Thank you. So now we're going to put this in a little bit of practice. We're going to take a look at some of these topics and strategies through the lens of Edward. Edward is not just one person. He's a conglomeration of people that many of us have worked with or may identify ourselves. Edward is a 35-year-old married with 2 children. Edward is new to the behavioral health field and the organization. He has a sibling with a serious mental illness, and this is one of the main reasons that he selected this profession. I'm sure a lot of folks can identify with that. He has a large caseload that includes several care clients who are still not fully engaged in treatment. He feels he's not had enough training and feels unprepared for the complexities of some of his clients. He consistently works late and has missed several family activities and events, and he's beginning to feel disillusioned about his work and is often exhausted at work. Consider Edward's experience and how he may be experiencing compassion fatigue and secondary trauma. Serious mental illness is personal to him, and he's passionate about it. But like we said, that can put him all at risk for stress, moral distress, or injury or burnout. Now we're going to take a look at some of the definitions of workplace stress. So as you see, now we're going to take a look at some of the definitions. Job stress can be defined as harmful physical and emotional responses that occur when the requirements of the job does not match the capabilities, resources, or needs of the worker. Job stress can lead to poor health and even injury. So there's, as on this other slide, you see there's a spectrum, a status of how a worker's stress can go through different flows. You see that the first section is thriving. That's when one person is really loving their job, they're good at it, they're obtaining high levels of meaning and satisfaction. I know a lot of us have experienced that when we first get on the job, a lot of meaning, a lot of good things are happening, we're really helping people. And then you could also flow through the status of distress. And that's a combination of physical, emotional, or moral strain that does not exceed the resources. Then you could potentially move to burnout. That's persistent and impairing emotional exhaustion, loss of compassion, and reduced satisfaction. And then potentially that could also lead to illness. And the illness can be defined as any persistent work-related physical, behavioral, or mental disorder. It is important to note that this graphic is referring to stages of workplace stress. We want to acknowledge that the status is not linear, but it must be considered as a fluid process. Some days we're thriving, and other days the work is giving us a headache. And we also must understand that workers also have pre-existing conditions that also can lead to additional stressors. For example, individuals living with disabilities may experience illness without burnout. The challenge is for the work to not exacerbate the conditions and ultimately lead in distress, burnout, and worsening illness. The concept of job stress is often confused with challenge, but these concepts are not the same. Challenges energizes us psychologically and physically, and it can be motivating for us to learn new skills and ways to master our job. When a challenge is met, we can feel relaxed and satisfied. Thus, the challenge is an important ingredient for healthy and productive work. The importance of challenge in our work lives is probably what people are referring to when they say a little bit of stress is good for you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think this is really, really important. Thank you, Rachel. And when we think of where Edward is, I think that Edward is at the distress stage. This is an opportunity for him. He's still coping. He might be calling in ill, but he hasn't moved into the burnout stage yet. But you're right. It is a fluid process. Very, very nice. Let's talk about wellness. Let's define what we're talking about, the wellness regime definition. And this is something for us to think about. We have risk factors. We know that this work has high risk for stress and burnout. We go into it with that understanding. So it's any situation or process that contributes to moral distress by making the provision of optimal care less likely. Okay, what am I talking about? Moral distress is that emotional pain caused by failing to provide the best possible care in a high-stakes situation, maybe because of limitations in the system, your own training limitations, your ability to manage the system's problem. It's that situation where you know the best thing that can happen, sort of, or you don't feel like you're really able to give 100% because of whatever the reasons are, can cause us to feel bad about a thing. That can also lead us to have a moral injury. This is when you know that an individual has violated their conscience. You're with a client, you really know that one thing should happen, but perhaps the client is resisting or doesn't want it to happen, or the system doesn't allow it to happen, and you have to make a concession. When we do this over and over and over, it causes us moral pain on the inside. These are things that are risk factors for that burnout and injury. Okay. So burnout happens when you have that persistent emotional exhaustion, loss of the ability to express your compassion, loss of professional satisfaction. This is when you often see people who aren't even referring to their clients as clients anymore. They're calling them that person with schizophrenia, or that homeless person, and using derogatory and not person-centered terms about people. They have lost hope for themselves and for the work. Now, what can protect us about this? So a protective factor, and we're going to talk a lot more about this, is any situation or a process that helps reduce that moral distress, helps you reduce that moral injury, and allows you to continue to provide optimal care. Those are protective factors, and they're essential for us to have in our toolbox. Rachel, do you have anything that you want to add there before we move on to risk factors?
No, I think you covered it all. I just think that's important to have an awareness of these definitions and what they mean, so that you can understand, as we noted, in the status and the flow, like when you're moving to stages of burnout, and what you can do to protect yourself, as we'll get some more tools in this further part of the training to address some of those protective factor needs.
Okay, let's talk about some of the risk factors. We're going to dig in a little deeper here for this moral distress. And there are different aspects of it. Like, so there can be situations that cause you a bit of angst with the provider and the recipient. That would be our care respondent. So maybe there's a language barrier. There might be a cultural barrier that you don't quite understand. You might be working with somebody from a culture you don't quite understand, which causes you to feel uneasy. Maybe there's a lack of trust. There might be a power struggle. Some of these things you can control, some things that you can't control. Maybe there's an issue in the environment or the sort of system of care. Insufficient resources. Your client needs housing, but there's not housing available, or long waits, or there's maybe a financial barrier or challenge. The policies in your organization might not be person-centered. There's not good team communication. You come to work and you're thinking, Susie's going to be there, and Susie's called off, and nobody told you that there wasn't going to be any support for you. Poor team leadership. These are all issues that lie within the organization. We want to make it really clear that certainly as a workforce, as a worker, and somebody's out in the field and a direct service provider, you have a responsibility to take care of yourself, but the organization has to create the framework and the foundation and the support. They are, if not more, responsible for creating a workplace that allows the worker to do their work. Perhaps let's talk a little bit about the provider as an individual. Insufficient training on the job. Maybe you've had some past workforce traumas that you haven't addressed and are getting in the way. Maybe you have a personal injury or something. There's maybe a substance misuse problem. Maybe you're not doing your self-care stuff at your, taking care of yourself, sleeping at night, balancing your work. There's the provider's social environment. Insufficient social supports. There might be family stressors. You might have financial problems, legal problems that are, rolling over into your work. There are a lot of things that cause you moral distress that actually can result in your output at work and your ability to perform your work. What about the recipient of care, meaning our care respondent? Perhaps low socioeconomic status, which most of these clients are in that situation, really, really under-resourced. They have a history of past traumas. Maybe their behaviors are things that are a little bit, can be off-putting for you. And if you don't have enough training, you don't know how to respond to. Substance issues, all kinds of things that cause you moral distress. Or injury. And then finally, the recipient of cares, that whole social environment. This is again back to the resources in the community to provide good services. Maybe there's community crime and violence. Your client might be in community and they're getting preyed upon, and you have very little support and things that you can do to help them. There's nothing worse than meeting somebody that you've been working for a while, and they come to you and they've been attacked in the community because people can be cruel to people or anybody that's different than them. And then there's this whole issue that we have talked about in other presentations, but systematic oppression, racism, all of those things can get in the way and be very, very disconcerting and very difficult for us to continue our job. Let's move on to the ARMS Wellness Program, because we want this to be an approach. We want to give you an approach for ways to think about this. And just like we talk about assessing our clients, it's important for us to assess our own situation, assess our own burnout, and assess our own job stress, and then to come up with a care plan for recovery and a way to mitigate those stressors and to strengthen our resilience. And for that, we lean into Dr. Bill Nash's. He's a pioneering expert in prevention and recognition and treatment of moral injury, and he's a leading researcher. We're going to use his ARMS framework for that. Let's talk about how to assess. So, we could go through all of these really formal things. We could have you take a Maslow burnout injury. We could have you read research articles for you to assess yourself. But most of you could just take a personal inventory and say, what is it that's causing me so much stress? I've given you different ways that moral distress, moral injury, what is it about the work? Is it a family environment? Is it me physically? Is it the fact that I don't have enough training? And just sort of jot down, what are the things that are giving you the most problems in the thinking? Do a self-assessment, if you will, about where you are. And then let's move on to recovery. How do we think about that? The first thing is when you do this assessment, and you're starting to come up with your care plan, it's important for you to slow down. And you may say to yourself, I've got a heavy caseload. How in the world can I slow down? You've got to slow down so that you can think about what you can do to take care of yourself emotionally, physically, socially, and spiritually. Do you need to go to see your healthcare provider and get a renewal on your medications and check your blood pressure? If you're somebody who's experiencing asthma, do you have your medicine? Are you taking time to make some time with your family? This is important. It's just as important, and maybe even perhaps more important, for you to take care of yourself so that you can be your best self when you're in front of your care respondent. That's really important. So slow down and develop that care plan for yourself so that you can replete the pieces that are deficit, right? Some things for you to consider are making sure that you put your safety first, making sure that if there's something that went poorly, a situation, that you mourn that challenge and talk to people about it. Do you need to schedule a vacation? Do you need to look at your caseload along with your supervisor and maybe adjust that if possible? Do you need to ask for help? Is there something that you can change and alter even at home to give yourself a break? Do you need to turn off your electronics and go to bed earlier, right? Do you not need to channel surf all into the night? Do you need to take a 15-minute walk to help reduce your stresses? This is important. This is time for the organization to step in. If there are things that you really feel that need to have organizational change, schedule some time to talk to your leadership and your manager about some things that are causing you problems. Speak up. It's an opportunity for you to speak up. When we think back for Edward, there should be an environment to let people know that if they see something, say something. That's really, really important. Do you need to pull in if your money is a problem at home, maybe you need to think about really getting some counseling on how to manage money. Or if you have a child that's having difficulties at home, you and your partner or their family get together and talk about that situation so that you don't feel guilt so much. Let's move on to mitigating. These are all strategies. Once you assess and you take some time to recover, these are all pathways to really building your own resiliency. Practice that trauma-informed care that you would give to somebody that you're providing services to, even on yourself. Use motivational interviewing with yourself and your family. Make sure that you're listening to the things that your emotions and the things that you're thinking. Pay attention to your thoughts. Process what's really happening, right? If you need to reduce the number of people that you're providing care for a time until you can rebuild up your own emotional and physiological stores, have a serious conversation with your leadership. We all know that it's expensive to have a lot of turnover. They would probably much rather have you speak to them honestly and provide you support than have you quit the job and walk away. Importantly is to have self-compassion. Negative talk is just that, negative talk. You wouldn't want your clients talking negatively about them. Just toughen up and just stick it out. To have compassion, acknowledge that this work is hard, address conflicts, and then try to surround yourself with people who are positive. It's not good to surround yourself with people who are just as burned out as you are. Make sure that you have a situation where you can talk about these things and process it so that you can move forward. Let's think about Edward, our overwhelmed behavioral health employee. If there was an opportunity for, once a month for people to get together and talk about situations and provide, even if not formal learnings, informal learnings with Edward, he would feel more supported, that he could come and talk to other colleagues in the workforce. And then finally, let's strengthen. Let's go to the next slide and talk about what we're really trying to do. The last step is going to involve deciding which of those protective factors, once you've done your assessment, you've figured out a little bit of a recovery plan, you've thought about some things to mitigate, list those factors down so that you know exactly what those triggers are and how you're going to start figuring out ways to mitigate those things. Prioritize the biggest protective factors that you need. If we talk about Edward, if one of the things he really said is he doesn't feel comfortable about, he doesn't feel like he's had enough training, to have a list of what he would need more training on and talk to his leadership about it or seek that out on his own time so that he feels more comfortable. Now, what's the organization's role in consideration about this now that we've talked about this a bit? Before I do that, though, I just want to touch bases with my colleague, Rachel. Rachel, do you have anything you want to add to what we've just talked about, what I've just been talking about?
I think you hit it really hard on the nail, like really empowering the employee to think about things that can really support them in addressing some of their burnout issues. Like if there's a mentorship program on the job, making sure that folks and employees are connected to it. If there are training opportunities, making sure that it's known. I think that's one of the things that I could do better as a leader as well, and making sure that there's communication mechanisms for staff to be able to get that information to leadership. That's another thing. Folks might not even know how to even, where the first steps is. They might feel afraid to. So really us, like as leaders watching this training, really creating that pipeline for the employee to be able to get that feedback to leadership so they can make that change and really create that environment that fosters health
I think you're right. One of the things I was thinking about this is the first thing is to acknowledge, for the organizational leadership to acknowledge that this work is hard, to make sure that trauma-informed care is just not a training that you send people to. It's something that you've implemented in the workforce, that you really are a trauma-informed care workplace. Look at your policies and your procedures. Become educated about workplace stress. As somebody who's led an organization myself, get out in the field. Find out what your workers are. I'm not saying going out there every week or every day. We understand that you're in meetings and there are other kinds of obligations, but to go out and see what your staff is really coming up against. If it's coming through the clinic, sitting in the clinic, sitting in on an appointment, if the client agrees to that, so that you know what the constraints are. I've had more than one leader think that they know what's really happening, right? And until they get out there, they're like, whew, I don't know if I could do that every day, but you're expecting your staff to do that every single day without giving them the backup support. And then how do we change it? Ensure that the workload is in alignment with the person's capabilities and their resources. Let's talk about Edward. We know that he's new to the profession. We could be mentoring him with a much more seasoned colleague to say, this is who you're going to go to. Certainly you've had your onboarding, but if you have questions, you can go talk to Rachel, or you can talk to Karen, and she can help you with those kinds of things. And make sure that mentoring program, if there's not an official one, that there's an unofficial one, that we support each other. Everybody feels better when we know that. Identifying early on what the trainings are, making sure that people can get trainings and opportunities, build networks among the staff and an opportunity for them to talk to each other. Look at work schedules. One of the things that's causing Edward lots of problems are that he's missing out on what's happening with his kids. Have an environment that maybe he can come and talk to his boss and say, hey, my kid has got a really important baseball game. Is there something that I could come in a little earlier or work a little extra shift? Could I switch a day with somebody? I really want to be there for him that day or her that day. So those are all things. And to have that be something that leadership supports and to the best of their ability. Maybe they can't do it all the time, but sometimes there's some flexibility in the work. Training, care conferences, policies, have a quiet room for staff, and an opportunity for the team to have a little bit of fun. That's always good, where you can just let your hair down every once in a while, have a pizza party, and people can just sit down and have fun. That's okay to do. And that's important. So let's look at some ideas in action, and Rachel and I are going to look at this together. So we see here that Edward's struggling, right? He's been on that job and he's missing work, and he's tired of hearing the stories, or getting tired of hearing the stories. He isn't getting the support he needs from his workers. So he's actually quickly progressing into burnout. What are some things we might think about before we move on to support Edward? What would you say, Rachel?
As a supervisor, right, we could reach out to Edward and ask him how he's doing, right? We can let Edward know about an EAP program. We could meet with Edward regularly to get a sense of his stress level. We could consider Edward's partnerships and teams. And we could also, and this is like something that I do, discuss, and I literally did this today, discuss the realities of when you're onboarding the employees and list the resources to them. I think for a lot of folks, like, we get into this field really not knowing, and then like not understanding the resources. So not sure if I jumped ahead, but that'd be somehow or some ways as a supervisor to anticipate Edward's needs and support him with implementing ARMS.
I think you were right on target talking about that onboarding, because what you do, that when you talk about that during onboarding, you're now giving the worker permission. And you're acknowledging that this is work that not only are they going to care for others, but that you value as a leader them caring for themselves. So I think that's really important. Let's move on to resiliency and self-compassion and self-care, because we don't talk about that a lot. Let's discuss how leaders can foster and build resiliency. Okay, we want to suggest this as a viable mechanism through self-compassion and self-care. Let's go to the next slide. So self-care is, it's the hardest thing to do, right? As caregivers, we are trained to take care about other people. We're trained to be have the patient be in the center. And I agree with centering the work around the client. But, we also have to make sure that we're healthy and whole in order to be our very best self. So let's go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about self-compassion, because that's often poo-pooed. So it's a way of relating to who we are with compassion and acknowledging and embracing that imperfection is a human quality and part of our shared humanity. Just like the clients we serve, we ourselves are in the process of becoming. We're always building. And the benefits of having compassion and forgiving yourselves for faux pas or making mistakes or being tired or being grumpy one day is that it supports your resiliency. It acknowledges your humanity. It increases health promotion and benefits. It decreases your anxiety and your depression, because now you've acknowledged that you've made a mistake. You've put in strategies to change from continuing to make the same mistake, and it creates a positive emotional response. And this is really, really important for us to be able to continue to do this work. I like to think of self-compassion as a resiliency tool, right? So, when we see these terrible things that happen, I'm leaning into the work of Christian Neff. She says, when we witness the suffering of others on a daily basis, we can experience personal distress to the point of burning out. And caregivers who are especially sensitive and empathetic may be most at risk. And I love this depiction here, because you have this circle of compassion. Inside that big circle are all of our clients and our workers, the people that we work, our co-workers and our family members and our friends. But look who's on the outside. We have all this compassion for everybody else, but we don't have compassion for ourselves. Rachel, jump in here anytime. Do you have any comments about that? We always want to beat ourselves up, don't we?
Yeah, that resonates with me. And I'm sure the folks that are on this training who are on the front line or even the admin, because the thought of self-compassion is really always right. And not never to myself, and being kind. So that was one of the things that I experienced, not having self-compassion when I first started my behavioral health as Edward career. I had so much compassion for the individuals in the group home, but, I beat myself up every day for, not being able to get all the individuals into, housing, into a permanent home, even though it wasn't even my job, so I felt like if I would have had more tools, like a workplace that promoted self-compassion, I would have had more skills and understanding to be kind to myself. So, I think this is a really important concept that we as behavioral health practitioners need to lead with when we're thinking about workplace mental health, and at the micro level, how do we support individuals and their wellness as they support others that are going through serious problems.
I think you're right. So that requires that we self-monitor and use mindfulness, right? We've got to pay attention. We can go to the next slide. Pay attention to being here and now. You said you were feeling bad because you couldn't get people housed, and it wasn't your job to do that. You see, so we're even taking on the work of others, right? Because we see our clients in front of us with such need. pay attention to what's happening in your own mind. There are going to be situations and times, conversations and experiences between you and care respondents that are difficult. We have to acknowledge that. There are going to be things that are outside of your control and outside of the control of even your leadership. We have to pay attention to those things. Be aware of what you're feeling. Be aware of what you're thinking. Oftentimes journaling or talking about it. Many times when when I was in direct service and I'd have a particularly terrible day, I would just sort of talk to myself on the drive home about what happened and how I felt and just sort of get it out, just to kind of say it. Even though I was talking to myself saying I really felt like I did the very best that I could. I did the very best that I could, and it wasn't enough. And I had to forgive myself and to be okay. And just to think about that I did the very best. It's important to be mindful and address your feelings. You may at times, they might get in the way of you processing. You might have to go run it out, walk it out, swim it out, dance it out, but you've got to process those feelings. And sometimes you have to talk to other people about it. Maybe you don't talk to somebody at work. Maybe you use your EAP. Some of those feelings you might feel concerned about telling somebody about, especially as a new employee. There might be some we talk about Edward, there might be something coming up around his brother for him that's causing him more difficulty. So there are lots of issues. Let's talk about some of the myths of self-compassion, of why people don't want to do it. So myth number one is that it's a form of pity. No, it's not. In fact, compassion is a remedy for self-pity, right? A myth is it's a sign of weakness. The fact is it's really a sign of strength, that you're taking care of yourself, you're acknowledging maybe some areas that you need to be improved or what you could do better. A myth is self-compassion is the person is complacent and all you're doing is making excuses. No, it's really a powerful motivator. Once you really identify, okay, I did the best I could, but you know what? I probably could have done X, Y, and Z. The next time I'll do X, Y, and D. It motivates you to want to do better. Or I wish I knew more about the issue of substance use disorder with people who also have schizophrenia. And then you educate yourself about that and some better responses around if you responded in a way. That self-compassion is narcissistic, that I'm just taking care of myself. Self-compassion, the fact is a way to relate to who we are with kindness, even when and if we feel inadequate. It really is heralding that we are human and that we can make mistakes. So I'm going to just ask you, we're going to go to the next slide and talk about cultivating gratitude. Before we even talk about it, I just want you, the audience here, what are you grateful for today? Just sort of in your mind, think of one or two things that you're absolutely grateful for. We know that the literature has told us, the science tells us that having gratitude and actually saying those things out loud helps us physically. It builds our immune system. It lowers our blood pressure. It helps us to be more awake and, and optimistic and to be happy. It helps us to be more social. When you lay in your bed in the morning and you say, oh, I'm so glad I woke up. Look at the sky is blue and I'm alive and my kids are well and all of those kinds of things. That's much better than sitting up and saying all of the negative things. Consider a gratitude journal. Maybe we're not writing it down. Maybe you tell it to yourself in your phone of what you're grateful for that day and what all of the things that life has bestowed upon you. Because the truth of the matter is it could always be worse. It could always be worse. Gratitude allows us to celebrate the present. It blocks negative emotions, and it helps us to reduce stress. And it's nice to just every day, don't make it a big chore, but just to have one or two things that you're grateful for. And I always think back to that self-care plan. Self-care on the spot, or SOS planning, is really important for you to have. When you're feeling yourself feeling really stressed out, have that toolbox that you have some things that you need that you can reach into really quickly that don't cost a lot of money or take a lot of time. Maybe you need to put your headphones on. Maybe you need to have some lavender at your desk that you can just smell that helps you to relax and calm. Stepping away from the situation, sometimes you just might have to walk down this block and come back. I have squeeze balls at my desk, right? Maybe just stand up at your desk and take a 1 or 2 minute stretch or a 30-second stretch. It's okay to take a short meditation. You might want to go to the restroom and just close your eyes for a minute and take some deep breaths and just quiet yourself. These are all things that you can do in the moment that the literature tells us actually helps to reduce our cortisol or those stress hormones that can really make us sick in the long run. The other thing for us to do is to have a checklist. You've got your SOS on the spot, but we need to have actually a little bit of a checklist for us to think about. You might be feeling a little off today and say, well, gosh, am I sick? What's happening? Am I taking my medication the way I should? Am I remembering to take my multivitamins? Am I eating well enough? Am I drinking too much? Am I just flat tired because I'm burning the candle at both ends? I'm trying to give 100% at work and 100% in community and 100% in my family, and I'm not sleeping enough because I'm trying to do too much. Am I eating all the wrong foods, just loading up on fast food and things that aren't really nourishing my body? Do that checklist and also put that part of your self-care plan. Let's go to the next slide, and which is really, really essential. The same way you schedule appointments with your boss, with your clients, with your doctor, your dentist, schedule time for self-care. If it's time, just put it into your calendar. 15 minutes for relaxation, 5 minutes to meditate, 10 minutes time for the gym. A lot of times people think, I've got to do 2 hours. Even 15, 20 minutes makes a big difference. Whatever it is you like to do, if it's scheduling time for you and your kids, that's your self-care time, put it in your calendar. You and your child, whoever, you and your partner, because you've got to nourish those relationships as well, are going to go for a little walk or spend some time together to help yourself feel well-rounded. Do you want to add something to any of this, Rachel, as we talk about these self-care strategies?
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that the priority of us as leaders, as practitioners, like you said, really scheduling time to do this. I know that I need to be reminded by people. So having that support network as well of folks to hold you accountable to making sure that you prioritize these self-care practices is important. Like I said, I recently just started to take walks. I live in a scenic area in the hills of LA. Like, I did not used to appreciate my neighborhood. I'm just was at my Zoom. So now I actually make time to look at the city, and I could hear the birds. It's just so beautiful by changing your environment. So I really think this is important.
I think you're really right, because what you're doing by doing that is, we already know that going out in nature is healthy for us as well, right? When we're living in cement all the time, that's not really good. It's a resiliency building block. Let's go to the next slide. It helps us to acknowledge our humanity. You see down on the foundation, developing our communication skills, building that plan, developing relationships. As you walk in your neighborhood, you probably see people and say hello to them. You can ask for help. That's another big piece. Use your arms, have that self-compassion. When you put all those things together, you build resilience, because let's be clear, there's always going to be challenges in our work, whether it's this work or any other job. Every single job has stress factors. Every single job in the situation we're in has imperfection. Our job is to figure out how to mitigate it when we can and build resilience so that we can come out healthy in the long run. We're never going to get rid of all the trauma and the bad things that happen in the world and the environment, all of those things. That's not to say we throw our hands up and do anything. What we do is build our resilience and have a good response. Let's talk about some ideas in action here and go back to how Edward might approach this. Some ways to think about this, some practical self-compassion interventions are, for him to just say, this is really hard, right? If you were to have a meeting where people talked about their situation, Edward could hear other people saying how they're struggling too and say, I'm not really alone, right? Be mindful and say, this is a moment of challenge for me, right? To just acknowledge that. That's a self-compassion word. Shared humanity. I'm not alone. We're all struggling. We're all just doing the best that we can. That's part of it. How can we make this a little bit better? Send self-care and support. What do I need and how do I support myself? And I might even ask, how can I support my colleague who might be struggling? Sometimes if you're doing okay, but you've got a colleague that's having trouble, there might be an opportunity that you can do to help that person. Do you want to jump in here, Rochelle? Anything you want to add to that?
Once again, just piggybacking on that, like, what do you need? And then how can you, support others? I believe that's something that everyone should be empowered to do, particularly in this field where resources are limited.
Mm-hmm.
And we're facing, a lot of challenges with the people that we are working with. Being aware of what you need and what your colleagues need around you can help you, like you said, build collaboration and support, mentorship, and really make your environment, less lonely when you have other people. So being able to voice that and having compassion that this is hard.
Mm-hmm.
This is hard work and you need each other.
I think that that's true. It's hard work and not everybody can do it, right? And so that's why we have to support each other because it can get messy at times. It can also be tremendously rewarding when you get those wins and you help people and you help individuals change their lives. So how self-care and workforce wellness supports the care respondent. Let's talk about that and what we really hope to see. Let's go to the next slide. We've talked a lot about organizations, but what are we hoping for? We're really hoping for the realization, the care respondents' engagement and treatment, that they, are able to engage in services that are offered to them, that it increases their engagement in the care process, that their participation in the development of an agreement or a care plan goes better because you're energized and you're engaged and that you're actually working with them in a meaningful, authentic way. That the participant is participating in their self-care and they're advocating for themselves. They're seeking assistance when needed, open to respectful guidance and feedback, that you're open to guidance and feedback, that the relationship is reciprocal. We learn as much from our care respondents as they learn from us. Knowledgeable about the strategies, because the self-care strategies that we use for ourselves, we can actually teach them to our care respondents. They're experiencing stress too. Participation in the development of that PAD or the psychiatric adverse directive if it's required. We're just really hoping that using self-care management skills and taking care of yourselves helps to really realize the wonders of this new program and opportunity for our care respondents. So let's think about some ideas in action here. So what are you currently doing that you're going to stop because it isn't working? Let me give you an example. Are you working through your lunches? Are you not taking lunch? Are you chronically coming to work with no food and you're eating at the bad fast food place down the street every single day and drinking sodas all day or coffee all day long? So you're not nourishing your body. What haven't you done that you're going to start doing? Because it may work. My colleague Rachel said she lives in a beautiful scenic area in LA, and she started taking some walks, and it's made a difference for her, right? What are you already doing that you're going to continue to do because it's working? I know that there are a lot of you who are doing things that really are working. I'd like to hear some of you think about being so hard on myself. I'm going to stop being so hard on myself, scheduling time for myself. I'm going to run my I'm safe checklist and just see where I'm at on that. I'm going to do my arms and see how stressed out I'm feeling. I'm going to stop just complaining about it and get an action plan of what I'm going to do to help myself feel better so that I can continue doing this work, leaning on my colleagues for support, talking to my leadership for support. Those are all ideas of things that you could perhaps start. Rachel, you want to jump in here? Anything else I left off you want to add?
I think it's just all resonating, like with particularly, once again, as a leader in a behavioral health company, the stop being hard on yourself is really key. I mean, as someone with lived mental health experience and is a provider, the biggest thing is like being hard on myself and that counter transference, like, and making sure I start that checklist, making sure I have my arms. And that checklist resonated with me too, is the medication piece. Like, have I taken my medication today? That's really a big important for people like us who are providers and who are recipients of service. That could throw everything off. So just making sure, I mean, and then the continuing thing, like us continue to lean on our supports and networks is really going to be key if we want to make change. If we want to have, a healthier, better work environment, we're going to need each other. So really good points to really lean in on.
I think that you're right. A lot of times we think when we say medication, we're thinking even taking your vitamins, taking your blood pressure medicine. If you've got arthritis and you need to take some Tylenol, take your medicine. Those are all things. Drink your water. Take care of your body. We have one body to take care of, one mind and one soul. And that's really, really important. They always tell you when you get on that airline, if something goes down on the plane, put your oxygen on before you help somebody else, right? That's really, really important for us to think about. So in summary, let's talk about this. In summary, workforce wellness requires applying trauma-informed practices at the individual and the organizational level. There has to be an environment that welcomes that. Approach yourself with kindness and empathy to build resiliency, right? And build your own care plan. Develop simple strategies that promote a comprehensive wellness and resilience to reduce your own job stress. Use that assessment, recovery, mitigation measures. Do that. Use your arms. Use your SOS. Organizations must lead in the effort of workplace wellness. So there's got to be the framework, the environment in the milieu that you work in that supports this work. It's so essential. For leaders out there, the more welcoming and the more supportive your workforce is, the less stress on you, because there's nothing worse trying to hire, engage, get people up to speed. They work for you for a couple of months, and then you got to start all over because they can't stay in the workplace. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Patricia, and it's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you, Rachel and Karen, for walking us through what sustainability and resiliency looks like in practice, and for sharing strategies and past experience. Again, we just wanted to reflect on our objectives today. The goal is that by the end of this session, you will have an increased ability to recognize those work-related stress and triggers, both in yourself and colleagues that you work with, especially those that you supervise. And then be able to define the ARMS wellness regimen, which is that assess, recover, mitigate, and strengthen that Karen and Rachel talked about, and then list some strategies for cultivating self-compassion and self-care, and describe a goal for what this looks like in practice. We had that discussion about what can you start, stop, or continue doing, especially as it relates to your sustainability and your ability to provide and sustain the level of engagement that you need. So just wanted to highlight a couple of next steps for you. Visit the CARE Act website for more resources. We referenced a few other trainings on trauma-informed care. You can find those on our website under the trainings tab. You can also submit questions and TA requests if you want a little bit more information about this topic, or you can request TA on how to implement some of these strategies in departments or part of your processes. So we just wanted to highlight again on the next slide our email address and our website. Please go and contact us. No way to get a hold of us is a bad way. So you can email us, you can submit a form on a website, you can, any mechanism. So we hope you reach out to us, and thanks for attending this training, and we'll see you on another training.